Alright, so I am back. First of all, before I get started with this video, I want to say a couple things to you guys. Number one, thank you guys for 500 subscribers. Hopefully in a couple days we can hit 1,000. And number two, Merry Christmas. I didn't get a chance to say this in person to you guys, but I know it's a couple days late, but still, Merry Christmas. And speaking of Christmas, the Baltimore Ravens had maybe the best gift of the entire year. The Baltimore Ravens just destroyed Thanos. They just destroyed the greatest team in the NFL. Well, at least that's what I was saying the past couple days. And yes, I'll admit, I was wrong. They are not the Thanos of the NFL. They're not the greatest team in the NFL. That throne now sits with the Baltimore Ravens. It was a very dominant performance. The final score doesn't really give justice to how dominant of a game the Baltimore Ravens had against the San Francisco 49ers. Lamar Jackson played great, and yes, we're going to talk about whether or not he should win MVP because I kind of have some thoughts on that whole race, which we'll talk about towards the end of the video. And in fact, I might make that a separate video at some point as well. Lamar was great. The entire offense was pretty solid throughout the day. It took a little bit for that offense to get going, but once it got going, it was phenomenal. And of course, this defense, 5 turnovers. Are you kidding me? Brock Purdy on the whole season has not been a turnover-prone player, but for some reason this week against the Ravens, he became that. And before anyone says that it was just an off day for Brock Purdy, sure, that could definitely be the case, but you also have to give a ton of credit to the Baltimore Ravens for what they were able to do. In a game where, statistically speaking, the 49ers had a pretty solid game, given the fact they actually out-totaled the Baltimore Ravens in total yards, passing yards, rushing yards. The Niners also had 2 punts in comparison to the Baltimore Ravens 3, and they were also 6 for 14 on third down, whereas the Baltimore Ravens were 4 for 11. But there were 3 stats in this game that they had to win, and they did not. Number 1, the penalties. They had 10 penalties for 102 yards, whereas the Baltimore Ravens had 6 penalties for 67 yards, and a lot of those penalties gave points to the Baltimore Ravens. Next was the turnover battle. The Baltimore Ravens were smart with the ball. They had 0 turnovers on the day, whereas the 49ers had 5 interceptions on the day, 4 of them coming from Brock Purdy. And lastly, the time of possession battle. Now, in my opinion, this is kind of an overrated stat, especially for the Niners because of how explosive that offense can be. But in a game like this, the Baltimore Ravens were able to win the time of possession battle with 31 minutes and 14 seconds, whereas the Niners had 28 minutes and 46 seconds. So statistically speaking, it was kind of an up-in-the-air game for the Baltimore Ravens and the San Francisco 49ers. But there's a couple MVP guys on this defense. Number 1, Kyle Hamilton. He has been phenomenal for the Baltimore Ravens, especially this week. He had a turnover play in this game that I thought was just a beautiful watch. He goes up for a blitz, and of course, because he's a safety, he gets destroyed by, I think, an offensive lineman. He then gets back up, makes a hustle play to make an interception off a tip pass. It was a thing of beauty, and I think every coach should show that to their players. You also have to give credit to their front 7. While they may not have any stud names in their front 4, they have a bunch of really solid players. Brent Urban had 2 sacks, Kyle Van Noy had 1 sack, Jadeveon Clowney had a sack as well. And of course for Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, if your front 4 is doing your job, it makes your job so much easier. And they're so damn talented that even when the front 4 doesn't really get the job done, they can do it no matter what because of how physical and how strong and how powerful they are. These are 2 of the best linebackers in the NFL because not only can they stuff the run, but they're also good in coverage. It is so unbelievably hard to find guys like Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen because there's just not many linebackers who can do it all like they can. Yet the Ravens have 2 of them, and Mike McDonald knows how to use them to their maximum ability. And while the front 7 is phenomenal, the back half of the defense, aka the secondary, might be even better than the front 7. Brandon Stevens, Marcus Williams, Kyle Hamilton, Ronald Darby, Marlon Humphrey. I mean, are you kidding me? Those are so many stud players. And Mike McDonald again knows how to use them properly. So they have a great head coach, a great secondaries coach, a great defensive coordinator. They also have some fantastic players. And even though this defense doesn't necessarily have a premier pass rusher, I don't consider Matabuke a premier pass rusher, but I do think he's a good one. This defense is still fantastic, and they don't even really have to have that because of how good everyone else is around them. Do you know how difficult it is to hold these 49ers offense to less than 20 points? It is unbelievably difficult, and even in this game, it took 5 turnovers for them to do it. The Niners are still a very good team, regardless of what happened in this game, but the Baltimore Ravens were just better, and you have to give a ton of credit to Lamar Jackson. On the day, Lamar Jackson was 23 for 35 for 252 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had an additional 7 carries for 45 yards. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it was a little bit of a struggle fest early on. Zay Flowers was having some drops, Lamar Jackson was having some misreads, he was also having a ton of pressure in his face from the defensive line of the San Francisco 49ers. But in a game where the run game was not really there, Lamar Jackson got the job done. His main target this week was Zay Flowers. He had 9 catches for 72 yards and 1 touchdown, but he also got the ball out to a couple other guys as well, guys like Isaiah Likely, Justice Hill, Odell had a couple catches. It was a pretty solid game all around for basically everybody, and this offense was able to move the ball down the field even if it was not always converting into touchdowns. Justin Tucker at the end of the day did have 4 kicks and a couple PATs, penalties, they were able to put up points. And I think that's the big thing against San Francisco. As long as you can continuously put up more and more points over and over again and get turnovers and stop them, you're going to win a lot of games. So for Baltimore, they came out there with a designed game plan against the San Francisco 49ers, and it worked. And when the Shanahan offense tried to adjust, the defense for the Baltimore Ravens adjusted as well. This was a matchup that is a potential Super Bowl matchup, and if they were to play again, I think the Ravens should be favored in that one. And if you look past just their most recent performance against the San Francisco 49ers, look back at their past two performances. They destroyed the Jaguars by over 16 points, and then they beat the Los Angeles Rams, who I think are on an absolute tear right now, 37-31. Their losses are against the Steelers, the Browns, and against the Colts, so those are all kind of understandable ones. And of course, if they were to play in the playoffs, I would imagine the Ravens would destroy them. And when you look at the rest of the AFC, it's not very strong. Arguably, the second best team in the AFC is the Cleveland Browns. I don't believe the Chiefs, because ultimately the strength of the Baltimore Ravens team is going to be their defense, and of course the Chiefs offensively don't have the pieces or the weapons to beat the Baltimore Ravens defense. Then you have the Browns, and of course the Browns did defeat the Baltimore Ravens one time, and I do think that could be a close matchup, but I do think Baltimore would be favored in that one pretty heavily. Those are two dominant defenses that I think can both shut out the offenses pretty well, but I just think Lamar Jackson is a lot better than what Joe Flacco gives. And sure, you have the Colts, the Texans, and the Jaguars, but I think in the playoffs when it matters most, the Ravens can win those ones pretty handily. So then your really next tough opponent is probably going to be the Buffalo Bills, and honestly, I don't really know who wins that matchup. I know if we're just looking at the record right now, then the Baltimore Ravens are clearly the favorites, but Buffalo Bills, man, they're a good team. They're definitely top 5. They have all the weapons on the offense. They also have a pretty solid defense, and I think their coaching staff is starting to figure out how to use the weapons offensively. Now, could they do that against a phenomenal Baltimore Ravens defense? I don't know. Obviously, they just destroyed the Dallas Cowboys and then really struggled against a really bad team against the Chargers. So the Buffalo Bills are kind of still a weird team, but I do think that would be a very fun game. In fact, with how everything looks in the AFC playoffs, I kind of think the Buffalo Bills versus the Baltimore Ravens could easily be the AFC Championship game. And just based off everything I know about both these teams, I think the Ravens would be favored in this one again pretty handily. I know everyone's going to say Miami, but we'll have to wait to see after this week when they play the Miami Dolphins next week. I do think the Ravens are going to absolutely destroy the Miami Dolphins, because I just don't see the Dolphins being able to do what they want to do against them. The Dolphins like to play with speed and finesse, and they're not necessarily good against teams that just punch you in the mouth. Like, as much as I think the Dallas Cowboys are a very good team, they're not really a team that goes out there and punches you in the mouth. They're kind of willing to play that finesse game with you, whereas the Ravens will punch you in the mouth, step on you, and take a shit on you as well. So I don't think the Ravens versus the Dolphins game is going to be particularly close, but I could be wrong. It could be a very fun game. So as I said earlier, they have the Dolphins next week, and then after that they go up against the Pittsburgh Steelers again. I would be pretty shocked if they decide to play Lamar Jackson and all their guys against the Steelers, especially they do have the number 1 seed locked up. It might be one of those things where they play the guys for the first half and then bench everyone in the second half to just rest their starters even more before the playoffs start, which could come very handy for this Baltimore Ravens team, because you just came off a very physical 3-game matchup against the Rams, the Jaguars, and the Niners, and then you're arguably going to have another physical one against the Miami Dolphins next week. So having the chance to have essentially 2.5 weeks off until your next playoff game could be an absolutely massive advantage for them. But now, as I promised in the beginning of the video, let's talk about Lamar Jackson and whether or not I think he should win the MVP award. And if you're asking me today who I think should win it, on December 27th, I would say Lamar Jackson. And before anyone says that I'm a bandwagoner, go back just a few videos ago where I talk about my NFL honors winners. Lamar Jackson was my winner, even back, I believe, in like week 10 or week 7 or something like that. So I've been saying it the entire time. Even when Dak and Tua and Brock and all these guys were having great seasons, Lamar Jackson was the most invaluable player for the team. You take away Lamar Jackson from this offense, the team is not nearly as good as they are, especially offensively. Whereas if you take your Josh Allens, your Daks, your Tuas, your Brock Purdy's away from their offenses, it's still a competent unit, especially if they have competent backups. Lamar's best weapon was Mark Andrews, and currently he's not going to play another game this season, so his best player is Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers and Isaiah Likely? Like, sure, he has a great offensive line and a great defense, but who does he really have to throw the ball to? Yet, despite not necessarily having that true dominant number 1 receiver, Lamar makes no excuses and is having a phenomenal season. He may not have the touchdowns or the stats that you might want for an MVP player, but this is the most valuable player award. And if we're throwing statistics into the mix, I don't think his statistics really look that bad. Are they as good as Josh Allen's or Tua's or maybe Dak's or Brock Purdy's? Probably not, but at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson has been consistent the entire season. He has never been the reason why his team has lost, whereas Dak has been the reason why a couple times. So is Josh Allen, so is Tua, so is Brock Purdy. His worst game was arguably against the Cleveland Browns, where he was 13 for 23 for 223 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, but guess what? The offense still scored 31 points. So I don't care what anyone says, right now my top 5 goes like this: Lamar Jackson, Tyreek Hill, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, and Tua Tagovailoa. And for everyone who says, why isn't Brock Purdy at least in your top 5? I have never had Brock Purdy in my top 5 why personally, I felt like he was kind of never the most valuable player on his team. I would have given the award to Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle before I gave it to Brock Purdy. And I'm not a Brock Purdy hater. I do think he's a top 10 quarterback, but just not the MVP. So I'll probably at some point drop a video about who should win the MVP award, but that probably won't be done until the very end of the season once everyone's stats and everyone's kind of season has ended. Because while I think Lamar is clearly the favorite right now, I still think that a guy like Dak or Tua or hell, even Brock Purdy, if they go out there and have a great rest of their season, could potentially jump Lamar Jackson into the MVP conversation. But that is everything I have to say about that. Baltimore Ravens and NFL fans, if you did enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button, as well as comment your thoughts and opinions on the current status of the Baltimore Ravens. And again, if you did enjoy the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button because that helps me out a ton. Again, we're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so hopefully we can hit that within the next couple of days. But I love you guys. Peace.